Okay, I'm going to talk about the Rarimo, which was basically mentioned like in other stages as well, and there's like this parallel things as well announced of what we do with other projects. But in general, like what people know as about us and what we've done recently and people recognize us is something that has to do with anonymous, untraceable voting. So about like 6 months ago, there went a digital protest, like a referendum straight in the heart of Russia against Putin. It was run by one of the opposition leaders, and the idea was like people would completely anonymously join and vote against the regime. The same concept and the technology we built was reused then by Amin Soleimani and Iranians, and he's presenting in parallel to another stage. And then it kind of spread on its own with the Georgian opposition MPs reusing it for the election campaigns and like just bringing this digital civilians in complete anonymous and unique way to support and show the sentiment. How most of the users that have participated, and in Russia the number was around like 40K votes, which might sound small from the overall audience perspective, but if you benchmark it with the latest protest held in that country, that was the largest single gathering since 2021. And the users who basically were using the blockchain and zero-knowledge proofs to cast their vote of dissent, they had no idea what was happening behind the app that was downloaded on their mobile phone. They would just take a passport, biometric passport, which contains the chip inside, tap it on a phone, and then, with the ease of a button, cast their vote. Anonymous voting consists of like two super important parts technically. First one is how do we build the registries of an eligible voters, and another one, how do we cast the anonymous vote on chain. The second part, fortunately, has been taken care of by many teams, and we had like more than enough technology like Semaphore for maintaining the anonymity of the votes and untraceability. But in a real world use case, the part that was missing was how do we construct fully anonymous ZK registries that guarantee the validity of a vote on one end, but as well does not allow anyone, especially in the passport case, for a government who has a copy of your passport, right, to be able to understand that you even registered to vote. So for these very high sensitive privacy cases, what we find out is there exists this kind of, I sometimes call it like the three-body problem. In a current framework and setup, you can't have a fully decentralized system like blockchain, and while putting an identity on chain, you can't guarantee the uniqueness of a user and the privacy at the same time. Let me explain that. For the uniqueness, you need to have some kind of a unique identifier, like a nullifier, as called in technical terms, right? And if you put that nullifier on chain, that means that potentially somebody that gets on hold of your passport can derive the same number and understand that you've registered, and basically they might not understand who you voted for or how you voted for, but they'll be able to understand that you've participated. And especially in high privacy cases such as Russia, that could go like for 5 to 6 years in prison. like even participating in this type of protest. And the same happens like if we reverse it, right? So if we allow the user on a phone to blind and generate the nullifier that can be traced, then we're losing the uniqueness. So this three-side problem in today's identity frameworks is solved by something I call this kind of a hardware tail. When we look at like any framework, doesn't matter, we bring passports, we bring like the certain data out of the real world, we heavily rely the identity to have those three properties guaranteed at the same time on an external issuer, a tester, third party. It could be an MPC, it could be a centralized issuer, it could be like multiple servers running another type of decentralized consensus in terms of updating. But to derive uniqueness and privacy, it's always delegated to an MPC. That's how every identity is built, like in traditional Web 2 or the frameworks that we see, how do we, of the modern frameworks we see, how do we bring these verifiable identities on chain. And I want to go into like the risks that this technical approach has, because like, yeah, there's kind of a chance of collusion, and most of the kind of innovation that happens around this is like, how do we decrease the risks of NPCs or this kind of testers in this equation to not them being able to like collude or not being able to trace them and not being able to somehow take the systems down, right? And apart from these kind of risks of delegation, what worries me and what we've already seen in real world is that those NPCs and those servers and those testers are run by companies. And the bare minimum we've seen is that like the pressure from a regulation. So they go out, they find the companies, different jurisdictions, different countries, put out the investigation, and in a way, identity frameworks, because of this dependency, does not really scale or does not provide a framework that is user-owned and permissionless. So while looking at this three-body problem, we said like, how can we solve it, especially for high-sensitive cases where you know that government or like the other party, the villain party, might go out to NPCs, might go out to business, might go to the individuals. So how do we change the framework where identities are not built as stable coins with a dependency on an issuer, but can have a more permissionless, user-owned framework? And that's basically what Rarimo does. If we zoom out at Rarimo as this kind of a decentralized registry, we maintain those three most important properties and guarantee that through such a flow. First thing, the decentralization. We've completely removed the issuer or an attester from the equation. Especially in the passport cases, that makes a lot of sense. Because the passports that bear our information such as name, age, uniqueness, citizenship, and we all have this type of like national identity, they have a chip inside. That means that they can sign and they can verify the credibility of the information that is stored on the passport side. So in the system of decentralized permissionless registries such as Rarimo, users are able to self-issue their identity. So you can have like different apps, different frameworks, just a phone, just an app, tap a passport, self-issue your identity. No one can come after you, no one can ban it, no one can unless they don't take the passports from it, right? And this passport infrastructure has been going on for like, I don't know, 10 years, right? And at least like the expiry date is 10 years. And even if those documents expire, we can reuse them because those microchips are owned and like they just sit in our pocket. Another important feature, like how can we guarantee the uniqueness without relying on the third-party issuer? And that's an important aspect. So what we do, it's a bit of a cringe version. So when you scan your passport, you derive a nullifier in the form of the hash, and you just publish it on chain. But it's a distributed large registry as a chain where all the passports, all these identity documents go out there and build this kind of a unique nullifier registries. But the privacy is maintained because the same tree and of the nullifiers and unique identifiers are shared by the different use cases. So we call it this kind of the privacy is the network effect, where somebody, even if they get on hold of your passport and derive the nullifier of uniqueness of yours, all they understand that you registered within the chain, but they will never figure out you came in here for like meme tokens, or you came in to vote against the regime, or you just came into here to register or do whatever you want. So this kind of plausible deniability due to network effect creates this kind of a shield where every passport, every document, every person around the world registering there is contributing to a kind of this network effect of the privacy. On its own, if you look at this approach, it creates this completely new framework and the setup in identity systems, which is permissionless ZK registries. I mean, we can call it like that. Nothing exists, this naming yet, but that's the cool part. It's not owned by anyone. It's not dependent on any issuer or company. It just basically exists on chain, and people are creating, contributing, and developing, and like validating and auditing that thing permissionlessly. I always say it's like this moment when for an identity, you always had this kind of stablecoin type of framework, now into this kind of self-owned, user-generated, permissionless way to put your identities. The cool part about this entire concept is that you can reuse the same logic and the setup to run different type of registries. And I don't know, I mean, if you presented and talked about it, but the idea is that like you can take the same setup and just launch the OFAC list, like this sanctioned list of the people. And the cool part about it that like anyone, this data about like the sanctioned list is like available online, right? And the setup allows you to basically download the data, you as a user, upload, generate the proof at like that whatever registry is used by XYZ application, the proof that it is the same registry of the data that you just downloaded. You can check the validity of it, and what's notable, you can check yourself whether you're included or not in the same registry. So it's a kind of open setup how anybody can become a registry without relying on any Oracle service or any service provider outside on this type of lists that are public and that could be verifiable on chain by everyone else. We started off this kind of like sub-registry of passports that everybody can already tap and join. We're extending into this kind of a registry of like sanction lists, OFAC lists, all that type of things. You can build out the commitments of like self-building social graphs and reputation systems. And I think like on its own, this entire concept and new category of permissionless ZK registries is something that makes a lot of sense in a decentralized setups. We're looking to introduce it as the kind of a roll-up that could exist across the different ecosystems. You could have these kind of sub-registries across the different layer 1s, layer 2s, or even like EVM and non-EVM setups. And the cool part about it is that you can build this shielding network effect as the data grows. And it could be maintained by any individual from all around the world who just have a passport or who just like been able to download and generate the proof of validness of the registries. I guess that's it. Thank you for your time.
We do have some room for questions from the audience. I'm looking around. Who dares? Not all at the same time. Okay. Yeah? Okay, we got one here.
How do you see registries, you know, the growth of AI, massive amounts of data going on chain, lots of, just data going on chain with AIs. How do you see registries being impacted by that? And then where does passports play into that, and identity? How do you see that space moving forward over the next few years?
You mean like how can AIs feed on this, or? Think of that like the ZK part, right? So what you see in this registry, it's like this blinded points of data with no correlation, like how they really connect to each other. The primary difference between this framework is that like there's no like a unique identifier, unifier that is attached to a person, but it's just like this kind of bits of like different identities that could exist in different registries, and only you as a user can decide what to bind, what to show, what to prove. Other than that, like there won't be a source or a force, even like your passport created as a government, even able to trace it, right? What I don't like, in a way, in other type of identity systems that are biometric, is that why passports are better than biometrics. So in a way, in the passport scenario, it has this unique thing. So you generate your identity keys, you bind the passport to this identity key, and this passport has an expiry date. So you always have this kind of chance to go like reissue this documents, ditch the old one away, and you got this kind of the everlasting ability to restart yourself as an identity. And in that case, what happens is like you got this number, passport attached to it, but this number is completely out of thin air, so no one can trace it, even the AI, and you can always kind of like clean up yourself or like tidy it up for the next reuse. When you put a biometrics, like eye, right? Or, I don't know, a hand palm. This is the number. So your eyeball is the number. And that, based on that number, AI could do magic of tracing stuff. And that's, I think, this fundamental difference, why we should move from dependent identity frameworks to these scattered, chaotic, even like blurry and confusing registries. And I think that is kind of prone to all this AI threat more, and it gives more control on the user side. And that's what it makes sense in the longer future. Thank you.